you can't go where the nervous system doesn't invite you. You can't.
Yes.
And if we put that under any model, you
Mm-hmm.
can't go step 1 to 10 if the nervous system isn't saying, okay, we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
learning to recognize what's happening is, I think that's left out of many teaching pieces. Like, how do you know your client is actually still with you on step 6?
Welcome back to season 4 of the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I'm a psychotherapist specializing in trauma treatment. I created this podcast because I'm surrounded by people who have dedicated their lives to navigating healing. There is so much wisdom in each guest this season, and my hope is that this show makes their important ideas and experiences available to you in a way that uplifts and inspires you. These guests and I have committed our lives to fostering health and joy in the world, even as we work through the impacts of trauma and face deep challenges. Let's dive into season 4 and let's keep talking about how we can heal. Today, our guest is Deb Dana. Deb Dana is a licensed clinical social worker, clinician, consultant, author, and speaker specializing in complex trauma. Her work is focused on using the lens of polyvagal theory to understand and resolve the impact of trauma in our lives. Deb is well known for translating polyvagal theory into a language and application that is both clear and accessible, and for her significant contributions. She's pioneered the rhythm of regulation methodology, tools, techniques, and practices which continue to open up the power of polyvagal theory. Deb believes that we all benefit when we have a basic understanding of the ways the nervous system works and learn how to become active operators of our own nervous system, as we discussed today. We also talk about the founding principles of polyvagal theory. We'll explore some challenging aspects of trauma recovery, both for therapist and for client. And we talk about glimmers and how they found their way into her work. Deb and I connected originally through Stephen Porges, who recommended that she come on this show. I'm so grateful to be connected to them both. They embody so much of what they teach, which makes for a truly delightful conversation. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. So thanks for being here, and let's welcome Deb to the show. So Deb Dana, welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad Stephen Porges connected us and sent you this way. I'm a big fan of both of your work. And I know from meeting Stephen, he's just such a wonderful human. And so I feel like anyone that he's entrusting and working closely with, friend of his is a friend of mine. So I'm really grateful to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. And I echo that about Steve. He is a brilliant, humble, and very kind human. And I think those 3 qualities are hard to find in the same being. So yes, he is wonderful.
When someone embodies what they're teaching, you're like, thank you, because I can watch the slides or I can just take this in and take, energetic notes and bring that with me. How did you find this work? What led you to polyvagal theory in your life? I'm sure there was a time in your life where it wasn't a part of your daily being, and now it's a big part.
Now it is my life, I think. Yeah. But there was a time before polyvagal theory, which is hard to remember now, because when I discovered it, and I discovered it by reading Steve's first book, Polyvagal Theory, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with that work, and it was like a missing piece of the puzzle came into being for me. I'd always been a neuroscience sort of themed. I'm a social worker, so I always thought my clients should understand how their brains work.
Yeah.
But here came polyvagal theory. It's like, oh my goodness, this is what needs to happen here in order for clients to really understand and be able to, what I say, become active operators of their nervous systems, so that they manage the everyday challenges that we all face, and even some of the more intense ones. And then, of course, come to therapy for the ones that are truly held in their survival states and are traumatic for them. But that's where it started. And we were just talking about Steve. I sent him an email, because back in those days, you could still do that. You just send someone an email, and we started a conversation. And I said, would you come to Maine and do a workshop for my colleagues? And he said, I'd love to. and that's where it all began, in this very simple sort of back and forth conversation in an email. He came to Maine, and I like to think that, well, I know on my end that my nervous system just felt a kindred spirit with his, and
Mm.
it's a lovely match because he's this brilliant scientist, um, and though his work had been getting out into the clinical community, but he's very clear in saying all the time, I am not a clinician.
Yeah.
And so, I came along and have been playing around with how to bring his work into clinical application, and it was this lovely match, this lovely meeting that then has emerged into this long time friendship collaboration. And I'm clear to say I'm not a scientist, so
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
people ask me the deeper science things, I say I don't know. That's
Yeah.
a steep question. So we
Yeah.
stay in our lanes, but our lanes are traveling together. So yeah.
Which is such a brilliant way to work together, right? And I feel that way too. I'm like, I'm love ingesting neuroscience, and I'm not a neuroscientist, and I never will be. I'm a clinician, and that's my strength for sure too. But I think, yeah, sometimes we can overstep, and sometimes we can do this beautiful work together, support each other, toss the ball. You take that question. Yeah, because I read that first book, or I tried. It was a lot of work.
That's
And
the
most
common
people,
experience.
I
Yes.
recommend, I mean, he's even said it, right? He's like,
Right.
oh, just read Deb Dana's. But I think before maybe it was the pocket guide, or there was something in a bridge version or something, and then the pocket guide. Now I always recommend the pocket guide to people.
Right. Yes.
Start here, right? The glossary is the first thing. Even in the audiobook, they read it. So you can just get some terms if you want, or you can jump
Right.
into a little conversation.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
do think there are some basic terms that everyone, I think, should be familiar with. I know when I did my book for Sounds True, which is for a non-clinical audience, we really had an ongoing back and forth conversation about the words hierarchy, neuroception, co-regulation, ventral, sympathetic, dorsal, which
Yes.
are the only words, I think, the basic language of polyvagal theory. And I said, I'm not willing to not have those
Yeah.
in there. I said, I'm willing to put, and, another way to think about it. And it was lovely because at the end of the process, my editor there said she was so glad that we kept it in because now they're all talking polyvagal, right?
Right.
What you do. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
such a language. When I was writing my last book, I was in the crunch time, and I parked at my office, and my office is right across the street. Actually, it's in between 3 coffee shops, like a triangle. But it's right across from a Pete's, which was my preferred place to go because they had more seating. And I would go and write. I pulled into a parking spot. The license plate in front of me was like PVT6. And I was like, it's everywhere.
Exactly.
I was like, I'm sure someone else sees something else in this license plate, but all I see is polyvagal theory.
Exactly. And I love it because it is starting to find its way into more and more places. It's in the clinical world, certainly, but now it's also moving out into the everyday language and the medical world and the world of schools and business and leaders. So yes, we'll see more license plates like that, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And they really mean polyvagal theory. They'll be like SP, PVT.
Right, exactly. Oh, I love it.
So that's great. Because my next question is, how do you tend to describe? I'm sure you get questions from people outside of the clinical world. You meet folks and they say, what do you do? How do you describe what you do? Or how do you describe even a little bit of polyvagal theory to people outside of the field?
I tell people that, the polyvagal theory is the science of how you are human, right? It's the science of your nervous system, which most of us don't have a clue about, except maybe in biology we learned something about sympathetic, parasympathetic. So we start from the beginning and simply that your nervous system is where your lived experience begins. So we think our brains run the show, but in fact, the energy comes from our nervous system. The information is fed up to our brains, and it's our brain's job to make a story that makes some kind of sense of what's going on in this embodied being we are. So, hierarchy, neuroception, co-regulation are the founding principles of polyvagal theory. I think when we understand those 3, then we can begin to move through the world differently, right? So, hierarchy is Steve's brilliant contribution to understanding these 3 states that our nervous system is always moving in and out of. the ventral, which is the system of regulation, connection, communication, where we hope to stay anchored while we're doing our conversation today.
Yes.
And I think it's where the nervous system longs to be and knows how to take us to, given the chance.
Yeah.
The first survival state, so the place we go next when the world feels too much, overwhelming, is what everybody knows as fight and flight, right?
Mhm.
That's the sympathetic survival system of mobilization. It's the twin pathways of anger and anxiety. And what Steve found when he was first researching neonates, tiny babies, premature babies in the NICU, he discovered this other aspect of what is the parasympathetic nervous system, of what used to be called rest and digest,
Mhm.
which is the dorsal vagal system, which in tiny babies is life-threatening.
Yeah.
Ventral's life-nourishing. It brings us energy to sustain us. It regulates our heart rate. It helps us breathe, all of these lovely things. But the other aspect of it, the dorsal, is immobilizing, and it's life-threatening for tiny babies. It brings bradycardia. The heart stops breathing, is challenging. And it was that moment when he discovered that the polyvagal theory was born, right? We now have, rather than simply fight, flight, or rest and digest, which was sort of you're either in one or the other,
Yeah.
we now have this brilliant hierarchy from the top, connected, ventral, regulated, then the next step down, fight, flight, sympathetic, the bottom of the hierarchy, that dorsal collapse, shut down, disconnect,
Yeah.
right? And it is a hierarchy, which is so helpful to know that we go through it in that order, right? So if I get dysregulated from something going on in our conversation, my first stop is fight and flight,
Yeah.
right? And hopefully fight and flight energy helps me take action to come back to connection.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, dorsal collapse, shut down, disconnect is always waiting to rescue.
Yeah.
And I think people understand that, right? That
Yeah.
they get beyond the words and go, oh, I know that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've lived that experience, maybe even today,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
In small ways, we do it all the time,
Yeah.
right? So that's hierarchy. And then if we think about neuroception, which is a word that Steve created because there was no word to describe how the nervous system listens and takes in information, right? Perception is how your brain does it, but neuroception is how your nervous system does it. And neuroception, you take in cues of safety or danger,
Mm-hmm.
three pathways. You listen inside your body, so that's the embodied pathway. You listen outside in the environment, and then your nervous system listens between. So your nervous system and mine are listening to each other right now,
Yep.
getting to know each other, right? And those three pathways are bringing a constant stream of energy, of information in, and also sending a constant stream of energy and information out.
Yes.
So that's how the nervous system begins to communicate. And depending on the cues, the nervous system through neuroception is then moved into one of the states in the hierarchy we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So with enough cues of safety, we move to that system of connection, regulation to ventral.
Mm-hmm.
But when cues of danger outweigh the cues of safety, we're going to first move into fight and flight and then to shut down, collapse.
Yeah.
So I love the way neuroception and hierarchy fit together, right? They just go easily, and you can't think of one without the other. They go together. So then the third is co-regulation, which is, Steve would say is where I should begin, but it's always where I end.
Yeah.
It is, however, the biological imperative is what we call it. We cannot survive without co-regulation.
Yeah.
And you know that, intimately yourself, babies need a loving, regulated other for
Yes.
them to be regulated,
Yeah.
right? That need does not end just because we become kids, young adults. It is across the lifetime need, a biological need in order to survive in the beginning, but really live a life of well-being. We
Yeah.
have to be able to be connected with safe others that we do that back and forth dance with, that
Yes.
co-regulating dance with. So, those are the three basic principles, and they're simple and yet they're really powerful.
They really are. And I have so many associations as you talk. One of the like memories that's really strong for me that about neuroception. And I've heard people say, that don't understand the word or like, oh, we're making up words now. I'm like, yeah, we're making up words all the time. Like, that's what we do.
Yeah,
We got to
right.
describe our experience, right? I think of when I lived in Italy when I was 20, and I think of this experience where I was hanging out with a group of friends. We were in Florence. I had lived in Bologna. We were visiting Florence, and we're walking down the street, a couple friends, and then two guys were like, "Let's go this way. There's a club." And I turn and look, and it's like a dark, quiet alley, and my whole body is like, "Nope,
Right.
nope."
Yeah.
You all seemed nice and fine a minute ago. And then you suggested we go there. So we're all going to hightail it the other way. Activation, right? Just get to safety. I don't care about any social awkwardness or them feeling offended. I'm just leaving now. Right. And I think that's so when people, and I think for the most part, when you explain neuroception or you explain an experience like that, people go, oh, I've had that happen. And we might call it a gut response. We might just call it intuition or whatever. But even in my memory of that, as I think of it, I have that feeling in my body of unsafe. Like if I could pick one word or two words to describe what my body was feeling, it was going not safe.
Yes.
And it was going anywhere but there. And it was really oriented to safety. Go to the light, go to the bigger groups of people, get away from this potential danger source. Is it possible there was a club down there? Maybe, like,
Doesn't matter, does it?
Florence, there's
Right.
weird stuff
Yeah.
everywhere, but I'm not trying to figure it out. Like,
And that's the brilliance of your nervous system. It
yeah,
bypasses your brain, right? It just says move,
go
get here, go.
out.
And later your brain's going to do all the, what if, make sense of whatever. But in the
Mhm.
moment, that nervous system makes a decision. It enacts a survival response without benefit of the thinking parts of your brain and without making moral meaning or motivation around it. It simply enacts a response.
Yes.
And that's the brilliance of our nervous system.
Yeah.
And we get in trouble when we override it, which
Yeah.
we do all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's not, that was an intense experience. You're not going to override that. But in
Right.
the less intense ones, when you get this sort of sense that, oh, maybe I shouldn't, but your brain goes, but you need, go ahead. And you do. And then it's like, nope, shouldn't have done that, right?
Yeah.
Your nervous system is a very wise system. It can also be shaped, to bring mismatches. If we've had a traumatic history, or if we've had a lot of experiences of being around unsafe or unpredictable people,
Oh, yeah.
we then lean toward that. And my neuroception may be more inclined to move me into a survival response.
Yes.
And so, for that, I often ask people to use the simple discernment question to bring them into the moment. In this moment where I am with these people, is this response or is this intensity response really needed?
Mm-hmm.
Not is it appropriate because nervous system is simply acting, but is it needed? And oftentimes, I do this for myself all the time. I think, oh, yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
That might have been an over response, and I can sort of bring in some other cues, right?
Mhm.
But the reason I'm having that response is there's a familiar cue of danger from my past
Yeah.
that's come alive in this moment.
Yeah.
Right. And so we do want to be discerning. And when you get an intense response, just follow your nervous system. You can figure it out later, but in the
Yeah.
moment, follow your system.
And I think therapy is a great place to bring things like that. I mean, I think that's a big part of the work is this thing happened and I had this response. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm starting to question it, or I'm getting different feedback from someone that I trust, or the situation evolved in a way where I'm not sure what's real anymore. And I think that's a great place to parse it out and to honor the response for what it is. Like you said, our nervous system just ingests all this experience, makes sense of it best it can, and then tries to protect us by, responding again to any similar cues, even if they end up being slightly or very different cues in the end.
Yeah, we create, neural expectations, not only beliefs that we carry, because we all believe, but your nervous system has an expectation based on past experience.
Yeah.
And so it goes into that mode. So as we, begin to sit back and reflect. If we can bring awareness and reflect, then we begin to see things a bit differently. Sometimes it's exactly what was needed. It
Yeah.
just felt weird in the moment, but oh yeah, needed. And
Yeah.
sometimes there's a different, we can begin to shape the system in a different way with enough experiences of something different, right? Because the nervous system is being shaped in every moment.
Yeah.
So where I am right now, is not going to be the same as where I am, an hour from now because of what's happening, right? We're having this lovely connected conversation. My nervous system is loving this, and it's going to hold on to that and feel, sort of begin to think there are lots of really wonderful people in the world.
Yeah.
And if this was the first experience my system had with someone who was smiling and welcoming and connecting, it would be a very different experience. It would be that sort of, ooh, this is a different experience for me,
Right.
a missing experience, a disconfirming experience. And my nervous system would need a lot of those moments
Yep.
to be shaped differently. Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember this client's face from like a decade ago who was just like, I don't trust this. Why are you? I don't think she even said to me once, why are you so nice?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Tone it down a little. I'm sorry.
But it's, I love that you say that, because sometimes we do. We think, and ventral is the essential ingredient in well-being. It's the essential ingredient for therapy being successful.
Yeah.
I have to be anchored in regulation, but the way I deliver that to my client needs to match what their system can receive. So yes, maybe you were, too kind. I had a client who told me, don't use your kind voice today because it'll overwhelm my system. And I have lots of other, anchored in regulation voices, and I'll just use one of the other ones. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, totally. I remember one recently saying, I was afraid you would get really compassionate when I told you that.
Right.
And I could just laugh and be like, all right, we don't have to go too deep on that. I'll just hear what you're saying. Got it.
Yeah.
But I love that you highlight too here this discernment and needed. I think, like you said, rather than necessary or appropriate, it's just, was it needed in that moment, or what was the impact of it? That helps us later on, at least, get some perspective and say, okay, this is how I'm choosing to work with and shape my thoughts, beliefs, and my nervous system in a way, right? This is where, we feel like we can start to guide the ship a little. We're not just riding, right, in a stormy sea of different input. But you said it so beautifully earlier. Did you say for people to guide their own nervous system, or what?
Become an active operator of their system.
An active operator. Yeah.
Yeah. Because really, if you think about, the clients who come to therapy, they just don't know how to do that. They haven't learned, and their system is pulling them into survival, and they get stuck there, right? And so for all of us, understanding what are the ways that we can begin to both honor the survival response, because we have to honor the response, and then find the way back to some ventral so that we can then revisit the survival response rather than reliving it.
Yes.
That's the process. Ventral does not cure trauma. It does not resolve triggers, but having enough ventral anchoring in my system allows me to go to sympathetic and dorsal survival states where those memories are stored, where those moments live.
Yeah.
And then do something with those moments rather than simply being pulled back in and reliving them as so many trauma survivors do, right?
Yeah. And that just becomes life, right?
Yeah. So then life becomes smaller and smaller because we're trying to avoid the triggers.
Yes.
Right? And we can't. And life becomes so tiny, and yet you're still, because neuroception, both remember, it's an inside experience too. It's not just out. What happens inside, my heart rate speeds up, and all of a sudden I'm back in that moment of panic.
Yep.
I have a stomach ache and I'm back in that other moment. So yeah, we can't make life so small. We have to find a ways to make life a larger, experience for us. And ventral is what helps us do that.
It makes me think of a model that's been around since, I think, 1999, Dan Siegel's window of tolerance. One of the things And I love how you can just put all these models together, how they mesh so well.
Yeah.
One of the things with that one that I would think about when I used to teach it a lot is just widening the window, right? So maybe there's something that's way up here that's very angering or activating, or there's something way down here that's really sad or makes us want to numb, or but we can breathe. I do a lot of yoga and more of like practices that lead us to stillness and being with sensation or thought or experience. And when we think about widening that window, it's like, oh no, I'm really angry. I'm just not hijacked by it right now. I still have choice. Right. So, and I remember a friend early on in a relationship where I got really upset with a boyfriend, and she's like, I can't believe you're not like packing his car and moving him out right now.
Right.
And I was like, I'm thinking about it for sure.
Right.
Like, but I'm also just sitting with all of this stuff that I feel, all the thoughts and the feelings and the nervous system reaction and the wants and the, is that really going to help though? Right. And so I think when we, there's sort of two pictures in my brain as you're talking. One is the classic window of tolerance, and the other is the polyvagal ladder.
Yeah.
Right. Where we just reach for the next rung.
Right. Yes.
And as you were talking about dorsal vagal, I gave an example of more of a, fight or flight. Let's get out of this. Let's not turn down the alley. Let's go to safety. More of an activation response. But in that dorsal vagal place, I feel like sometimes people have a harder time describing it or really getting words around it because it can be so visceral, or if there's a presence of numbness, like how do we really feel into that? And I always think now about like early post-pandemic, like first year, maybe 2020, late 2020, where people were posting the funniest memes that were like, so let me get this straight. Like you're as anxious as you've ever been, but you can't go anywhere and you're too tired to get out of bed. And one conversation makes you exhausted, but you're lonely and you want to connect with people. It's like, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because dorsal is, I loved how you said, can't find the words to describe it. Dorsal is often a wordless experiencing place, right?
Yeah.
Because all of the energy is drained from your system. Your system has gone into conservation mode, right? Heart rate's slow, breath's changed. The blood flow to your brain changes, and the oxygenation of that, which means, we're often numb or foggy or fuzzy or, in that sort of just, I can't move place. Right. And, or the sort of flavor of it that I feel a lot is going through the motions, but I don't really care. I don't have the energy to care, and I'm not here doing it.
Yeah.
It's a flavor of dorsal that I think people can sort of, oh, I know that flavor, because the full dorsal is that either dissociated because it's the doorway to dissociation, or the in bed just can't get up, which is more extreme, but sort of that, yeah, I'm here sort of. People kind of get that, and it's it is, everybody visits dorsal sometimes, and some of us visit it a lot. I do this thing where people find their, what I call your home away from home, which is the survival state that you tend to end up in more often. It's either sympathetic, where you ride it out in the activating, mobilize, fight, flight, let me do something, I got to, or you go to that dorsal collapse, disappear, become invisible, right? And that's my home away from home. That's where I learned, my nervous system learned early on, was the safe place. Fly under the radar, don't be seen, right? And it continues to be my home away from home when survival is needed. And over many years of work and therapy and life, I don't go there as often or as intensely, but I know that feeling, and it's right there ready to rescue me when needed, right? So, I don't know what yours is, but everybody has one, and it can change, over time. Mine has consistently stayed dorsal, so
Yeah.
I know it well. And I think that's something that's helpful for me in my work with clients, because I'm very, upfront about saying, oh, my home away from home is dorsal. And clients will say, oh, thank goodness. People in my trainings go, I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
Because it's so misunderstood and sort of a shame place, right? And also a place where people think you're just not trying.
Right.
In sympathetic, people get, oh, you are angry or anxious, there's something going on. But in dorsal, there's a lot of confusion.
Mm.
So, to really bring it out into the understanding, out of the implicit experience into explicit awareness, I think is really, really helpful. Right.
Yeah. And I love that you share that too. I would say mine is also dorsal in that it's behind the curtain, right? Like, let me just, and it even fits with what I just described of like, I'm not going to act out right away, right? I'm not going to pack ex-boyfriend's bags into his car immediately. I will have a conversation with him first.
Yeah.
So there's some regulation there. There's some access, between states in that example. But I think there's such and I'm sure a ton of people will relate to this, there's such a protection in going behind a curtain or in not being fully seen. And I think it's a Winnicott quote that's that tension between wanting to be seen and being so safe and comfortable not being seen. Like, if we're never fully seen, that's a travesty. And yet it's so comfy and cozy back here if I just hang out.
What's interesting is the you talked earlier about, we can come to this place of rest, right? Of stillness that you talked about. Stillness is so complicated because the nervous system has to go to that dorsal place of immobilization, but it has to bring ventral along so that we're safe in it. Because if it's just straight dorsal, there is no nourishment there. It is survival, escape, collapse, shutdown.
Yeah.
It rescues me from the overwhelm of sympathetic, but it doesn't nourish me in any way. And so finding those moments of stillness, the mindful moments, is such a beautiful way to begin to nourish your nervous system.
And what I love too about this model and the evolution of it, I'm thinking of a paper on yoga too that came out probably a decade ago now. I don't even know. Time is weird. Time is weird since 2020 and since having a child. I'm like, it's been forever. I can't remember time without her. But I think about these like Venn diagrams that we use in different ways. And what I appreciate about where this conversation is going is it's less, you're either in fight or flight or you're in rest and digest. And I have heard a lot of that in the yoga community. Like, this posture puts you into fight, arousal, and this posture puts you into rest and digest. And it's like, well, it's not that simple, right? We have to bring a little more sophistication and flavor to it. But the fact that we can blend and access these different states and move through them in a way that is actually very human and natural and expected of life. So it's not a right and wrong, and it's not an on and off, and it's not I used to be in dorsal and now I'm in ventral. It's, becoming that active operator and going, oh, I know this. This is familiar. And here's the bridge here. And here's the bridge there. And here's how this is really adaptive. Here's how maybe a little bit of hiding feels cozy and comfortable. And then I step out of it. But I then have the choice, which is very different from living on an operating system that was based on many cues of danger, not being aware of it, right? It's a very different experience. And I remember the quote, the quote from Winnicott is, I believe it's Winnicott, it's a joy to be hidden and a disaster to not be found.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah. Right.
I love that because the feeling in dorsal, my clients told me this over and over. They were lost, alone, abandoned, where no one could ever find them. That's the dorsal experience, right? Yeah. Whereas in sympathetic, you're big, large, energetic, seen, but not in a way that's connecting. So it's interesting.
If you're listening to this podcast thinking, I want to learn more body-based tools to help support trauma recovery, then you might be the perfect candidate for the Yoga for Trauma online training program. This 8-week certification is for wellness providers and enthusiasts who want to learn the theory and best practices for providing yoga and somatic tools to those navigating the impacts of trauma. Students often come into the Yoga for Trauma online training program, or Y4T as it's come to be known, knowing at a deep level that mindful movement can help with trauma recovery, but not knowing precisely how to articulate it or share these tools with others. Y4T breaks it all down and leaves you feeling clear about your choices as you support folks navigating post-traumatic stress. of course, the experience is good for you too. With 8 modules and 8 yoga classes, you'll get a taste of how it feels to practice yoga in a trauma responsive manner. Head on over to howwecanheal.com/Y4T to apply and join the program today. Mention the podcast in your application for a special bonus. One more time, nice and slow. The website is howwecanheal.com/the letter Y, the number 4, and the letter T. Looking forward to seeing you there.
I also love what you said about blends and flavors, because we're always moving. The nervous system is a dynamic system.
Yeah.
So moment to moment, it's moving in small ways, sometimes big ways. And all 3 states, ventral, sympathetic, dorsal, are always working in your system. Just because I go to dorsal survival does not mean sympathetic and ventral went away somewhere.
Right.
They're still there. So it's the blend that we're always working with. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorsal, vagal, and dissociation. I want to go there. So we talked about how dorsal is harder to perceive. I think dissociation is very similar, where even as professionals teaching about it, we come at it from all these models and ways. And we try to understand and communicate that. And in some ways we can get, Michael Coy, who came on the podcast, said, I think of dissociation as a lack of association, right? And we're just talking about these different states and how they are actually very associated, even though they can feel very dissociated, or we can think of them that way. So I'm wondering how you think of polyvagal theory and dissociation and what you've learned about that along the way.
So I like to think that because dorsal is the place that we go when we're trapped, when there is no escape. Dorsal is the path of last resort for your nervous system. And, as kids, when we are trapped, kids who survive, traumatic moments often leave, dissociate, leave. They have their body stays, but they leave. So I think of dorsal as the doorway to dissociation. You go to dorsal, you go through this doorway, and it may be, I had clients who they would go through the doorway and you truly knew they were dissociated, and they, were not here, they were somewhere, or they, were back in a 5-year-old moment or whatever that is. And, you can go through the doorway, and then you've got sympathetic energy may come on. You may have a punch, right? That just, mobilize, activates. You may actually, look like you're fairly okay in the world, but you're not really here. So I like to think of it as a doorway, not necessarily the destination, but the doorway that then leads us somewhere, I think is the easiest way for me to think about it. And so I'm always wanting to track my clients. And we all have clients who, dorsal is their home, and it is the place where they then go to dissociation. And so you begin to track that. My client who taught me the most about this, there was a tiny, tiny hitch in her breath just before she went through that doorway, right? And she couldn't recognize it for the longest time, but I began to. And so I could name it, and we could take some other action. And we finally got to where she was beginning to feel it, right? So it was a fascinating experience of just tracking that tiny moment. Oh, there it is, right? And it was the doorway. And when she went through the doorway, we didn't quite know where she was going, because there were any number of parts that could come and take hold. So yeah.
It's so wonderful to track those physiological cues. And I think work like this has really helped us do that in the clinical world, right? We're not just thinking in cognitive paradigms, but we're really looking below the neck and at breath and in folks' eyes and expressions and all these little micro cues that are so unique, right?
Yeah, and I love to think about them that way, that every expression, every, body sensation, every symptom anybody brings, for me, is the nervous system trying to tell us something. So our job is to, how do we learn to listen to below the brain, to listen to where it comes from? What's the nervous system telling us? Yeah.
You offer a lot of training to therapists, and how have you seen polyvagal theory and these concepts that we're discussing really help them in supporting other people?
I think the first place that we need to really identify is understanding the nervous system starts with us,
Yeah.
right? So it's helped clinicians be able to become present, stay regulated,
Yeah.
um, engage with clients differently, right? That therapeutic presence is really your nervous system sending a communication to another nervous system. And as you said before, there are different ways for different clients, right? There is no one way to do this. I think that's the beauty of following the nervous system, two nervous systems in a conversation. So that's where I think it started, that clinicians would come to my trainings wanting to know what to do with their clients.
Yeah.
It's here, it's in your own system first.
Yeah.
And now they understand that's what they're going to get first. And then take the exercises we're doing to understand your system and offer them to your clients.
Mm.
And I can't tell you how many people reach out. I love reading my emails because people will say, here's what happened.
Yeah.
All I did was do the first map so that they could begin to get to know their nervous system. It was like light bulbs went off all over the place, right?
Yes.
It is pretty magical because we just aren't used to thinking this way.
Yeah.
Right. So it adds different information stream that is missing. And so I think the acceptance in the clinical community is wonderful.
Mm.
I know there's lots of conversations going on in the scientific and academic community about, this whatever happened 500 million years ago, and did it go this way or this? I leave that to Steve, and
Yeah.
I tell people who come to my trainings, I shouldn't say this, but I don't care, because what I care about is I offer this to my clients and they change, they get better, they heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, it's all that matters. So yeah, it's really, I think clinicians are beginning to really understand, because they're having experiences, right?
Yeah.
And clients are easily getting to know their nervous system. It is not a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
You take a moment in time with a client and say, oh, that was this part of your nervous system working in service of your safety.
Yes.
Yeah.
And from all that healing that you've witnessed and heard about, I wrote it down. I really love reading my emails. That's my new mantra. Because
There you go.
I need that right now in my life. As I come back from maternity leave and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so much here. It seems like a to-do list. No, it's communication. It's central, right? If you curate it, perhaps.
Mhm.
So how do you feel? How does change happen? If you just zoom out and think of all of these beautiful changes that you've been a part of and you've seen and you've heard about, what's the simplest way you can describe the change happening?
Patience and persistence,
Yeah.
because change happens by doing small things over and over. Nervous system change. A nervous system reorganizes not in one moment, right? We do have those moments when we feel something shift, and it's like, ooh, there's a before and after, but they're rare. Most of the time, it's these small moments that begin to accumulate in our system, and then we have more access to ventral, and then things start happening differently. So I often ask people to notice, between this week and next week when I see you again, can you find something that happened differently?
Yeah.
Not worse, but what was different in your nervous system response? Because if you are a dorsal dweller and you start having anxiety or anger, you're moving up the hierarchy. Your nervous system's beginning to come alive in a different way. Whereas other, models might say, oh, that's bad.
Right.
Oh, that's your nervous system reorganizing. So,
Yes.
we look at it through that lens, and we look for the small changes that are happening. And that is then how change happens, right? And I think if we can take it out even larger in the world, as more people have access to ventral, the
Mm,
world can begin to change,
mm,
because the
mm,
world can't
mm.
change when people are stuck in survival,
Yes.
right? So yeah.
And that, in my mind, is the power of this type of work. And, I've heard over the years many grumbles about therapy takes so long.
Mhm.
I just want
Mhm.
someone, I'm going to hire a coach who promises me in 10 sessions, I'll be better. Right? Like that just sounds so much better. I get it. Right?
Does sound better. Yes, I
That
want one
sounds
of those.
better. I
However,
want that too. Resolve it all, fix it all. And I see this investment. I'm thinking about a particular client I'm probably like at 8 years with. And the difference in this person's nervous system, it's really night and day in terms of their experience of the world and the way they interact with other people around them. And so there's such a deep ripple effect when we can learn and with some level of acceptance or compassion for, oh, this is something within me that was trying to protect. It worked then. Now I'm older, more mature, been around. It's not really working anymore. It's now causing problems. Let me reorganize that, redirect. And there really is a significant ripple effect. And so, I mean, I find that I just wish everyone were exposed to this type of thinking. Everyone had the opportunity to receive therapy or support in the way that serves them best, to have the internal awareness and connection, right? And even to understand things like, this is why I run the other direction from yoga, because I go in and the teacher says, can you sit down and get still and take a breath and love yourself? And I go,
right? Your nervous system says, no, thank you.
And your nervous system says, no, just close your eyes, go inside. Whoa, right?
Yeah,
and when we get that, then we can find, as people who are offering support, we can find an avenue that's more appropriate. But when we get that for ourselves, then we can also find an avenue that's more appropriate for.
And I think that's probably what I hope people take away from understanding their own nervous system is that there's no right or wrong way. There's the way of your nervous system. And so when I'm offering something, I want to offer it in a broad enough way so everybody can find a way in. Right? Just not come in, take a deep breath and close your eyes. It may be for somebody, but you have to, what does this nervous system need in this moment? That's really
So that's a common problem I see people make a lot in the yoga world. All right, welcome, close your eyes, go inside. Without any external anchor point, without anything. Is there another common just thing you see people do in the polyvagal world that's like, ooh,
well, if we think about, let's think about schools for a minute. We're expecting one nervous system to be able to co-regulate, 30 others.
Yeah.
Never mind the fact that the 30 others are all, find different homes away from home, and some days are regulated and other ways not, right? If you're a clinician who runs groups, you are looking at a lot of different nervous systems that are all working in different ways. So it's sort of that sense of, people will learn, a couple of my practices and then think, oh, this is what I do, right? No, this is an outline, right? And then within that, in this moment, how would you and your client connect around that? So I love it. I love the fact that it's not a protocol.
Yeah.
Right. You don't follow steps 1 to 8. You are in a conversation with the nervous system. And for some people that is dysregulating rather than right. For some clinicians, that's dysregulating until they really can settle into, if you're anchored in ventral, you can go on a journey with your client, even though you don't know where you're going, but it's safe enough to do it because you're taking ventral with you.
Yes.
Right? That's what I really want people to get out of this. And I think, it's a different way of looking at it.
Yes. I'm thinking about Michael Coy again. Shout out to Michael Coy if you're listening. Hi again. He was episode 3, I want to say, of season 3. And he talked about EMDR and dissociation, and same thing where there's this strong pull to protocols, understandably so. It's the 10 session coach, right? Please sign me up for that. I want it to exist. I want it to work. And with things that are really complicated, like an entire developmental period of abuse or neglect, or it's just not, it's just not what's needed. And he talks about just that same thing of people wanting the protocol, but it's really you've got to learn those skills and tools and then bring them for yourself often to stay in a regulated place, to stay relatively grounded and oriented in time and space best you can, and then to connect with what's happening with the other person. And that's the work that's happening, right? Rather than just, I'm going through this 10-step or 8-step protocol to produce some result. That's going to end up being superficial and sometimes even misguided because we're not listening or really fully taking in to the best of our ability what's actually happening in the moment and what's actually happening for the person that's with us.
And our clients will, often I say, if you work with trauma survivors, you have to be so careful, and you hold such responsibility, because they'll go with you wherever you go.
Yeah.
So they're going to go through step 1 to 10, but they're probably not going to be there for step 1 to 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
They look successful, but they left on step 5, right? Or you're going to know it, because they're going to get sympathetically dysregulated, and then you're going to, what do I do?
Yeah.
Right. And then you get dysregulated. It's really the clinician's dysregulation that then sends a message to the client, oh, something's not safe here. So it's a fascinating way to work. And I agree. I think that, I'm an IFS therapist, and there are, steps in the model, and yet, sometimes you go here, sometimes here, because, you can't go where the nervous system doesn't invite you. You
Yes.
can't. And if we put that under any model, you can't go step 1 to 10 if the nervous system isn't saying, okay, we can do this. But learning to recognize what's happening is, I think that's left out of many teaching pieces. Like, how do you know your client is actually still with you on step 6? Or, it's easier with IFS because a part will come in and get in the way. You feel it, it, but still, we try to have our client, override what the nervous system is saying to them, which is always a dangerous choice.
Right. And that comes right back to relational safety, which comes right back to ventral vagal, which comes right back to really what we're hoping to cultivate access to, right? So if we in the therapist chair are, trying to push the river too much in one direction or another, and we're not respecting the flow of what's happening, or where it's going, or where it slows down, or where it speeds up even, if we're trying to control it too much, it just becomes unsafe. And then there can be a lot of different fallout from that. But I think the saddest part is that it just, there isn't really a progression for the person who's usually seeking that progression, maybe seeking a pause too, but also seeking some sort of, the pause is part of that. You said patience and perseverance, a lot of P words right now, but right. It's like that pause can be part of the progress.
Right. We I have this continuum I use. We stretch a bit, and then we savor it. We stretch and we savor. So we do it. We celebrate, we pause, we let it sink in. And when we push too far, we move across this tipping point into stress and then survive. And as soon as the nervous system moves into survival mode, change cannot happen. Not because I don't want it anymore, but because my biology will not allow it.
Right.
So there's so much good reason to stay in the stretch and savor side of this. And that's where the work of, we always say slower is faster in the therapy world. Well, this is why. You do little moments, and you let them settle in, and it begins to build, and it reaches another tipping point where something changes. So, yeah.
So let's talk about little moments settling in. Let's talk about glimmers. How are you working with glimmers these days? And how would you describe them just to the audience? Maybe if they haven't heard the term.
Glimmer is a tiny moment of ventral, of that energy of okayness, right? Sometimes it's magical, sometimes it's joyful, sometimes it's just a pause, a moment of, oh, okay, right? There are all sorts of flavors of glimmers, but the hallmark of a glimmer is that it's just a tiny moment that appears, right? And they unpredictably emerge, and sometimes there's I call a glimmer environment, which for me is the beach, right? I go walk the beach, and I know I'll find a glimmer. There's always some moment waiting there. But glimmers, and I want to be clear about saying, do not take care of triggers, right?
Yes.
But what they do, and so when I'm working with clients, I always want clients to create a glimmer practice. What I tell them is, it's not that we're going to discount your trauma. We're not going to avoid or not work with your triggers. It's that when you have glimmers, it's a reminder that your nervous system can so wonderfully hold both the trauma and those moments of okayness.
Yes.
And that's what is needed in order to move through whatever is stored in your system. We need those tiny moments of okayness. So, it might be I'm looking out my window, the sun's shining. There was a bird singing a while ago. There's, a scent that emerges. For you, there's all sorts of, little baby things in your house that are these tiny moments of, oh, right.
Yes.
And when you think about it, as you said before about the sympathetic get me out of here, that comes alive when you remember. But glimmers also, when you remember them, come alive again. Because they're moments that your nervous system has lived and has wired in, has experienced and taken in. So glimmers seem to be within reach for people nowadays when a sustained experience of regulation and joy or ease or whatever seems like a bridge too far. We never quite, right? It's really hard to get there nowadays for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
Right? But a glimmer
is also a finite state, right? I think we can get in that on or off. I'm healed or I'm not, and we're just these dynamic beings. We're never, we can be. It's not like self-regulation is this, pinnacle of the mountain that you're climbing. It's ongoing.
Right. And the nervous system does this in this moment.
Yeah.
Experience. So in this moment, I'm feeling pretty regulated. And then, an hour from now, maybe in this moment, I'm going to throw this dish across the kitchen, right?
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
Right. And it's that change that happens all the time, which means we're alive, which means we are actively present and engaging in the world. And the goal is not to be anchored in ventral all the time. That's not achievable, not reasonable, not desirable.
No.
The goal is to recognize when I'm pulled into survival and have resources that help me return to ventral. That's it. That is the goal.
And the glimmers help with that, like I was saying earlier, a bridge, right? A bridge between states. And also, I've always used the term resourcing. And I wrote a whole book about it because everyone's like, let's talk about trauma. And I'm like, well, you just said trauma. So you're probably thinking about things that are kind of hard. And now we're in this state, right?
Right.
So let's talk about resourcing first, and then let's talk about trauma.
Exactly.
But glimmers is so much more fun because I think I shared this with you earlier, that I think of the sparkle on the water. And I was just in a conversation where we were trying to think, is there a name for that in any language? Like just that beauty and that inspiration. There's so many words I could try to get around it. But if anyone who feels that same feeling I feel when I look at that, it's sparkle. It looks magical. It's nature. We usually notice it when we're in a place of relative stillness or ease, or, if we're walking down by the beach or watching a sunset or pausing by the lake. There's so much in that. And I think of it as really a 50-50, somewhere in that range where, yes, we need to go into the challenging parts of ourselves, memories, states, and that's not the entirety of life. And, people use the term trauma vortex, right? When we start going in, some of these feelings can be so strong, and the enactments around them and the lived experience around them, that's probably not the right term, but right, like the experience we have living in that place it can be really challenging, right? So if we're only there,
right,
that's a really hard life. And some people have lived in that, right, for years, for the most part, being in more of a protective or, dorsal, vagal, or sympathetic state. And then if we actually made glimmers and resourcing and, anchors into positive moments, half-ish of our goal, really dipping our toes into something different. And I think about that, and the ratio is going to be whatever it is in whatever session and moment, but I just think it's so important. And for the most part, as I came into the trauma treatment world, we're just really focused on all the trauma and all the manifestations. And I still feel like there's not quite enough, maybe because it's
well, our clients come to us because of their trauma. They come to us because of their dysregulated systems. And so we're pulled to want to work with that. But the science tells us that reducing or resolving those triggers is only half the story. They also have to actively experience the safety, the glimmers, in order to be truly in a place of well-being. Right. And, we're trained to work with, the trauma, the dysregulation. And so you're right, we need to also, make space for and make people understand that it is also needed to find those moments of okayness, the glimmers, the moments we can just sit and share a smile. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm encouraged because the curious human being population has decided glimmers are fun, and apparently they're all over social media. I'm not on social media, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
People email me and say, which I love, because it's just a way to remember your nervous system does both.
Yeah.
Right? Does both. And that gives us a moment to be not in the midst of the survival energy, and know that yes, we go back there, we go back and forth. And I don't know what the percentage is either, but
Right.
Some sessions are 90% working in the muck, in the mess,
Yeah.
in the dysregulation. Oh, we have these moments.
Yeah.
Come out, catch a breath, and go back. So yeah.
I think polyvagal theory helps us to give those moments weight, scientific weight, right? And I know in the world of psychotherapy, in some ways, usually in a way that serves, but in some ways, in a way that doesn't serve, we're looking for science to validate, right? Validate, this is what I'm doing, because sometimes it's ineffable, it's relational, it's hard to put a point on. But I feel like this conversation around glimmers and connecting it to ventral vagal and just giving that weight, for myself as a clinician, it's freeing, right? It supports us in laughing in session. It supports us in being playful appropriately, right? It supports us in smiling or in using some of these things. Like in EMDR, we do resourcing, before or after a really intense session. And it's so important. And it really makes a difference in the type of treatment that people receive and the type of care that they get. So I'm wondering if you have an example or a thought around when clinical treatment goes well, when someone's maybe wrapping up with you and it's a real feel-good place. What do you feel like has happened? How do you know? People ask this to me all the time. How do I know if I'm done with therapy? There's always life, right?
Right. How do I know if I'm actually, it's an interesting question, because my clinical work has always been with complex trauma survivors. And some of them reach the place where they feel like, oh, I know enough about my system. I'm regulated enough.
Yeah.
I have enough skills that I can go through life, and I do not want to go back and process anything. Beautiful. Wonderful. Love it. And others get to that place to go, okay, now I'm ready to process what happened. So there's no, it's, again, it is, what does that client say? Here's where I am, and here's where I want to go. Right. So and I think for many of my clients, and maybe for yours and your listeners too, we can see that clients are probably ready, but they're not ready.
Yeah.
Right. They want to keep coming. They want to keep, the connection, right? They keep that beautiful sense of nervous system to nervous system connection. And, so I always found myself in the place of, helping clients think, so, where else? How do we cultivate this in other places? And then once they begin to get that other place that they can feel what they feel when they're sitting with me in my office, they would say, the only place I can ever do this, the only person I can talk to. And I say, well, thank you. I love that this work is so deep and connecting, and I'm not magical, and this place is not magical.
Yeah.
So when we can identify concretely, what are the elements that make this environment safe for you? What is it in this connection that feels safe? Concretely identify them. I can help you go find that other places.
Yeah.
Right. So that's that sort of next step of, how do I create a larger world with my clients? So, it's hard to know when they're done. And sometimes I'll say, try it out, see what happens.
Yeah.
Door's always open.
Yeah.
See, you want to go every other week? Do you want to check in once a month? What works for your nervous system? Right. Because I'm always asking the nervous system, because I don't really care what the brain says, because the brain is going to go in all sorts of different places. What do you think?
Yeah.
What does your nervous system think? And then let's put it into language, so the body and the brain have to cooperate. So it's a, bottom up meets top down, not just bottom or just top down, because we need but I would often have clients say, so my question for each session is, what do you want to take with you from the work we did today? That's not the ending question. And what I think and what they told me was often miles apart, right? So it's
Love
fascinating.
that.
I said, great. And then now that, you know what you want to take, how do we bring it into a, something you can actually hold on to between now and then? Because I think between session, work is what really keeps this going. So
Oh, yeah.
that's where we go with that next. And, it's just, it's fascinating to keep following that, right? What do you
Yeah.
want to take away from this session? And then you can broaden it. Let's look at the work that we've done. And, for those of us who had to do treatment plans, 90-day treatment plans.
Yeah.
Right? And now we're in the, sort of that habit of, every 3 months we'll review. On a nervous system level, that is like centuries, right? We should be looking every 2-3 weeks, what's shifting, what's changing, and bringing that into explicit awareness with our client.
Yes.
Because they're not going to notice. They notice the big thing. They don't notice these beautiful, subtle, nuanced changes that are happening. And that's our job to notice with them. So they stay engaged, they stay, positive. They don't feel hopeless because they haven't gotten to this place.
Yeah.
Right? They started here, they're not here, but boy, they're moving like this.
Mm-hmm.
We can bring that alive. Then it's like, oh, hope is here, right?
Mm. Yeah. And it can really be a worldview shift and an entire different way of living in the body and being in the world. And that's huge, right? And those little steps are hard to track because they're subtle and they're, but then if you take a look back, you go, oh, a lot has happened, even in a short amount of time sometimes, or definitely over the course of weeks, months, years in therapy. You can go, oh, I had a therapist once read back my goals from, it was probably 3 months, right, before. And if you had asked me that day, I would have been like, same problem, same day. And she read my goals. And I was like, that's not happening anymore. That's not an issue.
Yep.
And it was
Right.
so helpful. And it was so instructive for me as a therapist too, because I realized how, as aware as I think I am, totally dropping the ball and actually tracking my progress here. It is not, it's just not happening.
Right. Yeah.
So I have one more question that I really want to ask you. And it's, as I've been, sharing polyvagal theory with folks in the yoga world or with, people I'm consulting with, I'll get articles sent my way or podcasts that are like debunking polyvagal theory. And I'll, in the beginning, I would just like skim or read or whatever. I did listen to one entire podcast and it was a little bit challenging for me, but I was like, I don't think they understand polyvagal theory, actually. Like, I listened to how they were talking about it and they were kind of throwing opinions around as we do. And I was like, I don't think they actually get it, which is unfortunate because they're like taking a position on it. So I'm sure you've heard and received some of these things too. And I'm wondering what you say to, like, I don't know, polyvagal naysayers, people who kind of throw an article or a podcast your way. Do you give that any energy? What's your response?
Yes, because it's, underneath that, debunking, there's an activation, right? 'Cause you can feel it. This is not a regulated, intellectual conversation that's happening. There's something going on underneath. There's a fear that's being expressed in this way. So yes, I want to pay attention to that. And with my clients who would come in and, bring me articles or say, oh, I just heard that, or, many of my clients who go to Wikipedia.
Oh yeah.
I still have people who email me the Wikipedia. I said, please don't go to Wikipedia for scientific information, right? That's not where we should be going. So, what I do now, Steve actually just published a new article, and I think it's probably on the Polyvagal Institute website, which takes the construction of his theory from beginning origins to now, and looks at every one of the, what do we call them, comments that others make about how polyvagal theory is not correct, and it takes them one by one and addresses them, and it's a really beautiful thing. So before that, there was another article on the Polyvagal Institute website, which is where I would send my clients, and I'd say, if you really want to explore this, you need to read Steve's scientific work, which is very difficult to understand, but this is where you need to go, because this is the discussion that's going on. And you're right, people are, as Steve would say, misunderstanding the very founding principles of polyvagal theory. So that's where I go with people, and usually with clients, and even with people who come to trainings, they have an experience of their nervous system, and it kind of no longer matters to them in the same way, which I
Yeah.
find fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? They begin to know their nervous system. It's like, oh, I do this thing, the hierarchy. I do go down and up, and so then it's like they kind of join me in that. I don't know what the scientists are talking about, because truly it is such a deep evolutionary um, hair they're talking about that I don't, and I don't need to, and I so. Some clients are going to stay, or colleagues are going to stay in that place of saying it's not for me. I say, great, doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And I tell clinicians, you may get clients who want nothing to do with mapping their system, understanding the system, and it doesn't matter. You can still be considering them through the lens of their nervous system, right?
Yes.
My hope is that people who understand begin to see the world that way.
Yeah.
No matter what's happening, you're looking at nervous system response. So even if you get clients who say, not going there, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm always there, and I'm always sort of curious about what's happening in their system.
Yeah. So I feel like we could keep this conversation going forever. I have so many notes. Maybe we'll have you back on at some point, because I want to be respectful of your time. Where would you send someone who's personally struggling right now, who's listening to this and going, I want some glimmers, and I know that state? And do you send them to the Polyvagal Institute website, to
yes, that is a place you can go. It's polyvagalinstitute.org, I believe. I usually invite people to come to my website, which is rhythmofregulation.com.
Mhm.
There are a lot of, you can listen to a lot of interviews I've done. There's a beautiful audio meditation page where you can listen to the meditations, and my creative director composed the music that goes with them. It's really lovely. And we're going to have some new offerings coming out. We're doing a website redesign, some new things, but there are lots of ways you can, sort of tune in gently. I
Yes.
think, which is, again, another word we want to use. There's a gentleness to this way of working, right? It needs to be, patient persistence and gentle. So yeah. Yeah.
And what's next for you? The website redesign? Any other books?
Website redesign. I have a workbook I'm just finishing up that goes with my book with Sounds True Anchored, and have a project where we're dreaming up around glimmers. So I hope that project comes to life, because
I love it.
I think it will be fun to help people find their glimmers in the world. Yeah.
I'll look out for that. So if you're not on social media, how can people stay in touch and know what's coming next and when?
If you go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter there, and newsletter is also being redesigned. So we'll actually have one that's more predictable in the future. I have promised my people I will do my part.
Rhythm and regulation.
Rhythm of regulation.
Rhythm
Yes.
of regulation.
Yes.
In the newsletter. Rhythm in the newsletter.
It's a little, I love you. You have a new phase in your life, and I'm at the other, and I'm 70 now, and people know who know me and listen to me. My husband needs care now, and so I'm in that other place where, when I said, throwing the dish across the kitchen and breaking it, really not, but those moments of like overwhelmed too much, that happen on both ends of life. In the new baby, I can't sleep, where the husband who's anxious and panicked in the night can't breathe. So it's the same thing. So I'm trying to find this rhythm of regulation for my own system, and being able to have a regular newsletter and have a website that's easy to navigate are sort of those external ways of bringing some of that in, which I think will be helpful.
Yeah, because running a business or having a presence and sharing your work is another sort of way that our nervous system is pulled, right? I think that's sometimes the final frontier for us therapists, or one of them, because it can be really dysregulating and it can be really challenging.
I said the other day when I was teaching, I teach much better than I practice, right? So I'm still learning to, listen now before it gets really big. So that would be my invitation for everybody listening, to listen
the
when the
time.
nervous system is not screaming at you, because if you don't, it will scream. It will just take more and more intense
Right.
action to get your attention.
If you listen to the whisper, it doesn't have to scream. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I always like to wrap by asking, you started alluding to this, what brings you hope in this world that we live in today?
And, I've been doing a lot of work around how do we change the world, right? And I get overwhelmed easily by the systems that people are wanting me to how do we change a system?
Mm.
Overwhelming easily. I come back here to my system, right? Because I know that if I'm a regulated being, that through neuroception, that's the energy and the information I'm putting out into the world. And as I wander through the world, other nervous systems feel a bit of safety, a bit of welcome and invitation to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a ripple effect. And so I imagine that ripple effect. And with enough regulated moments, something's going to shift and allow us to have these really challenging conversations that we need to have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Deb, for coming on the show and for sharing your wisdom and experience and passions with us. Would love to have you back on if you have another book coming out or anything like that. Come tell us about it. Love just kind of following along with the evolution of all of this and of your work and of polyvagal theory.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. For more information and resources, please visit howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the show notes for each show. Thanks for your messages, feedback, and ideas about the podcast. I love hearing from you, and I so appreciate your support. There are lots of ways you can support the show, and I'm grateful for every little bit of love you share. If you love the show, please leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, Audible, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can always visit howwecanheal.com/podcast to share your thoughts and ideas as well. Before we wrap, I want to be clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. In addition, everyone's opinion on this show is their own, and opinions can change, right? Guests share their thoughts, not that of the host or sponsors. I'd also like to send just huge thanks to our guest today, to Kyle Arizbal of Prolific Sound Solutions, and to everyone who helps support this podcast directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking care of the babe and the fur babies while I record. Lastly, I'd like to give a shout out to my big brother, Matt, who passed away in 2002. He wrote this music, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you here.